Hello, everyone. So, welcome to this exciting panel about the sustainability requirements. My name is Daniela Eichhorn. I'm the Education Project Manager at Fashion Council Germany. So today we will talk about some insights about the sustainability requirements. Sustainability has been at the forefront of conversation in the fashion industry, but moving from ambition to action requires structure, accountability, and obviously collaboration. Copenhagen Fashion Week has been pioneering this movement, first launching a pilot phase in 2020. Meanwhile, Berlin Fashion Week is adapting these learnings into its own sustainability framework, ensuring alignment with the city's values of freedom, inclusion, and creativity. Today, as I said, we will be exploring these sustainability requirements, the structure, challenges in implementation, and most importantly, how brands can be supported in this transition. We'll also discuss what the wider fashion industry can learn from this framework and how global fashion weeks can collaborate to create a more sustainable future. So, without further ado, let's dive in. We have here Cecily Thormstork, the CEO of Copenhagen Fashion Week. We also have Fredrik Larsen, co-founder of Infuturum, and last but not least, Scott Lubinski, the CEO of Fashion Council Germany. So, yes, thank you. My first question goes to Cecily. Can you tell us a little bit about the idea and where did the idea came from for the Copenhagen Fashion Week about the minimum requirements, and how did you decide what requirements to introduce?
Sure. So I joined Copenhagen Fashion Week in 2018 because I had this ambition to challenge the existing fashion week, but also the existing purpose of a fashion week. I had been working at the global fashion agenda for the years prior to that, hence having been very engaged in sustainability in fashion, but also maybe a little bit frustrated that I didn't really see enough progress being made in our industry. And as you also mentioned in the very beginning of your introduction, there was a lot of ambition and a lot of talk about sustainability. And definitely also a lot of willingness, but there was also the harsh reality of driving businesses that maybe hindered, a proper progress. So, with that in mind, combined with the fact that a fashion week is a very impactful platform, some would say it's a platform that has power, because it's so important for the fashion industry. I was like, okay, so let's use this power that we have
And visibility.
And visibility to drive change in the industry. And I thought that we probably wouldn't get very far if we would just announce new tools or recommendations for brands. So I had this conviction that we would set requirements. So sustainability requirements that brands would actually need to live up to and to some degree document that they were complying with in order to participate in our fashion week. And to some people this might not sound like super radical, but maybe you are familiar that at all fashion weeks, the traditional way of accepting brands to a fashion or to the show schedule is by assessing brands on fashion criteria. So you have brands applying for a fashion week, and you assess them on their fashionability and their showmanship and the potential to bring about lots of fabulous moments to a fashion week, and then you can get accepted or you can get declined. I thought that we needed to extend those requirements to also include sustainability requirements, and to include sustainability requirements that did not only relate to the show production, because I'm sure that we can all produce something that's zero waste, or it's recycled or repurposed, and not very resourceful. But sustainability requirements that actually covered the entire value chain of a fashion brand. So from strategy to production and the fashion or the materials, and of course, what am I? Consumer engagement in the show. A lot of different aspects.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, everyone, as you all said, everyone can produce a very sustainable show, but in the long term, it's where it really matters and where you can make the most.
It's about how you operate your business.
Yes.
So we announced that we wanted to go in this direction back in 2019. Back in 2020, with a 3-year sustainability action plan that we developed in collaboration with Infoturum, but more importantly, as the center piece of our 3-year sustainability action plan was our sustainability requirements framework. So we presented that, and and here we are in 2025, and we have brands showing at Copenhagen Fashion Week that we have assessed on both fashion and sustainability criteria. Actually, not we, but an external organization that does the screening.
So talking about the framework, Frederick, you were more involved into it. Can you tell us or explain us a little bit more about how the sustainability requirements are structured, and also tell us the difference between the minimum standards and the additional actions?
Yes, I'll be happy to. When we teamed up, we started working on a framework that would create change and that would affect new decisions and also help smaller brands figure out where to start. Infoturum, we're a change agency, and we work with sustainability and social justice, often in combination. And the change process here is really to figure out how can we create agency for the people in usually smaller design-driven companies that are the major components in Fashion Week presentations. How can we empower them to take action? So it's a framework that really centers on what is easiest to make decisions on, and how does that affect the rest of the value chain, the people that work in the value chain as well as within the brand, and how can you communicate to consumers and your customers in a good way. So there are 6 focus areas within the framework that helps focus on the strategic aspect of it, the show aspect of it, consumer engagement, materials, design, and working conditions, especially in the supply chain. And within that, there are a set of minimum requirements, and then there are a set of additional points that will help guide decision-making within the companies. Because as Cecilia said, the most important part here is really to say, how can we affect change? And the change at this point, excuse me, especially was about setting requirements as well as educating the people inside companies who needed to know how to take action. Since then, when we developed this in 2019 and presented it in 2020, a lot has happened within the industry, luckily, also in terms of regulation and new directives and so on. But there is still a big need for setting the bar higher and creating strategic action as well. So the 6 areas will dive into the full value chain and the people and also the creative aspects of design. The minimum requirements are there really as minimum requirements, saying this is something that we would expect all fashion companies to be able to live up to. So the fact that a lot of them can is good. But the additional points in there are where the companies and the brands get the chance to figure out what are we doing, and they can express that. We ask them for answers, so they formulate their answers to these questions. And of course, they can also figure out what are we not doing. So there are a lot of additional. I think there are 86 at last time I counted it, in order to help brands figure out how do we work systemically and structured with sustainability.
Thank you. I have on that note, I have a question for you all. What are some of the key or most impactful requirements in your opinion?
Well, if I start, I would say that the strategic point for me is really important in order to affect change throughout the company and hopefully in the wider industry and the supply chain as well, both on social and environmental sustainability. There needs to be a plan. And the management in the company needs to be on board with it. So for me, the strategic part is incredibly important.
We added a new minimum standard just last year because we continuously, of course, revise our minimum standards to make sure that we're constantly pushing the industry for more. But one of them was on circularity, and I think that's that one I think we very much needed because we can, if we all continue to produce new clothes without looking into circular business models or circular design principles, we're not really going to go that far, or not as far, at least as I think should be the ambition of the fashion industry. So I think that one was very important. Yeah.
Scott, how has Berlin Fashion Week adapted Copenhagen Fashion Week sustainability framework?
Not yet. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
We're in the middle of the pilot phase. So it goes back a few years. When we were also thinking about, we looked at Copenhagen. Ooh, let's do that as well. So the first conversations were, okay, we need our own. So we're German. We need our own standards. We're a big nation, big capital. But at some point, Fashion Council Germany says, but that's rubbish. Why should we invent the wheel now a second or third time? And Cicely and I, we know each other from another organization, the European Fashion Alliance. We're both on the board. And I think we were together in Brussels at a round table with politicians. And afterwards, it just came up, I mean, why can't we adopt them? Just because sustainability doesn't know borders. I mean, fashion doesn't know borders, although we have two different fashion cities. So that's when the spark came and said, okay, we could adapt them, we should adapt them, and join forces, which is also a bigger signal to the industry outside. And that's how it started. That was, I think, 3 years ago. Took some time to get the city of Berlin, who is co-funding the implementation here in Berlin, to also support the project.
Yes.
And we simply then adapted them. So we looked at the requirements. We said they're perfect. We would like to add something from a Berlin perspective.
Yeah.
So we have our own code of conduct. And the way we're doing it right now, we said, okay, we're introducing it. And the go live will be next year. So right now, the brands are doing the survey, they're getting feedback, where can you really maybe change something, where should you change something, where are you perfect? And after the pilot phase, then it's going to go live. There's one difference in Berlin compared to Copenhagen, which is money. We are we're combining the requirements to our Berlin Contemporary funding. So in Berlin, you can apply for 25,000 euros to co-finance your fashion show during Berlin Fashion Week. And if you don't meet the requirements, you're not going to get the money. So that's a slight difference that we do in Berlin.
Frederick, I think you told us a little bit about the challenges, but can you go deeper into the biggest challenge when implementing the sustainability requirements, in your opinion?
Yes, I think that there are two different answers, and the one is the simple one, that the one that's about helping the people who are working in the brands who are tasked with this with filling out the survey and making sure that the company lives up to the minimum standards and so on. So there have been a lot of education. We've done a lot of webinars. We've done a lot of helping out in order to get people to understand it, because this kind of work is not necessarily something that a lot of people are used to doing,
Yeah.
and it's an area that is still a little scary to a lot of people also. So that process, of course, has created some hindrances. But I would say, and that's because my perspective is also to create change, that the major difficulty is the continuous sort of unsustainability of the industry, and the difficulty of actually making those fundamental structural changes. Because even though they are the framework, I think, is one of the very important tools for doing that. Of course, much more action needs to happen broadly through a lot of different initiatives. So that is still a challenge, because it means that sustainability isn't always top of mind for a lot of people, because we're still not seeing those fundamental shifts.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people or brands that are scared and see this as a negativity. This is a question for you all. What do you think is the best way to support them during this process? And how do you manage to do this in your case in Copenhagen Fashion Week? And what's the plan for Berlin Fashion Week?
I was asked the same question yesterday, and I compare it to myself. I just bought myself a new vacuum cleaner. That thing talks to me, constantly talks to me. I shouldn't push buttons whatsoever. And I filled in water because it cleans the floor as well. It told me then I did something wrong, till I found out actually that I was putting water in the waste container. And that's the same situation that we're in right now in Berlin. People don't read the manual like I do. So, and what we're doing right now, we're giving instructions, we're giving support. We're getting questions, why do I have to now create a sustainability strategy? I don't have time to create 500 pages. I said, well, no one's telling you have to create 500 pages.
Yeah.
So we're basically just trying to demystify what the requirements are. It seems to be so heavy, it seems to be so much, because some of the brands in Berlin, most of the brands in Berlin, are not a large organization. So we're speaking about maybe a one-man show, one-woman show, one-person show, up to big companies. And that's the phase that we're in right now. So during the pilot, many brands fill them out. Lots of blank spaces in the survey. And then again, we reach out and we try and demystify the tool.
Yeah.
That, by the way, is the vent of the hotel next door.
No, I completely agree with Scott that it definitely requires a high level of engagement with the industry. I think for us, we didn't meet resistance. I think we're very lucky that the brands in our community understood where we were coming from.
Yeah.
I think, sustainability has also very much been on the agenda in Copenhagen for a few decades now. So a lot of them felt that it was actually a really good tool for them to incorporate in their work, and maybe even that tool that they didn't know they needed or that they didn't know they missed. A lot of what I heard was, so much confusion around, where to get started. I want to do more in terms of sustainability, but I don't know. And I've read this and I've read that, and it's going in different directions. And I think what we at least tried to convey very clearly to the brands was, here is a framework that will get you somewhere. It's not going to make you a sustainable business, because that's another conversation. But it will guide you towards more sustainability in your company. And so I think brands embraced it as sort of that tool, that A to Z tool that they needed to grasp this very complex field of sustainability and to get them going in the right direction. We, of course, also supported very much through a pilot phase, and as Frederick said, webinars and toolboxes and guides guides to the guide to the framework. Yeah. So of course a lot of holding hands along the way, but I also think that once the brands tested it out, I think they realized that okay, yes, it is demanding, but it maybe wasn't that demanding. It wasn't the 500-page document that they needed to write and submit. We are very clear on exactly what level of documentation they need to submit, and I think that is widely accepted now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so too, and I think besides sort of helping out and giving information and making it clear that it's not as complicated. This thing about creating a common framework has been really important, and that was one of the first things that the first brands said when they saw it. It's like, oh, finally, there's a language that we can use. There's the same sort of framework. So that was a major thing, and then we had really good feedback from some of the brands who'd used it and said, well, besides being an educational tool on sustainability and helping us figure out what we're doing, it also requires me to go around to all the different departments in the company and ask them, because it's not just about one thing. It's not just design. It's not just materials. It's everything. So it became a tool to also structure that conversation internally. And one thing I want to add is I think those stories about how brands have used it and so on are important, because it helps demystify what it actually is.
Definitely.
And another thing I've said, I don't know how much it's helped some of the brands, but when both before the framework was developed or when we were developing it and after, we looked at all the existing certifications, of course, to make sure that we're not requiring something that if you're already working within a framework, this would be hindering that action. So there's a lot of hopefully sort of help into frameworks you're either already using or want to be implementing later on.
And I think a good example, just to put an example of that, is without mentioning any names, but when we did the pilot phase, we had a brand that I think they barely lived up to not even half of the minimum standards, and today, 3-4 years later, they're B Corp certified, and I think that's a really good example of them becoming motivated to do something in the first place, but also actually implementing measures that, once you implement these, you're not that far from, a B Corp certification. So it's just to say this, not being a completely new certification, but a framework that sort of reflects what's already out there has proven super successful, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. I mean, it's also a great example for the brands here in Berlin or in Germany to understand this is not against you, this is actually to help you, and you can even get something very, very big and very important out of it. What is the biggest learning for you in Copenhagen and for us here in Berlin by now? What is the biggest learning with the implementation and with adapting the sustainability requirements?
So if I should flag something positive, is that we did it.
Yes.
It's possible, and it is also possible to do successfully. We didn't know that when we announced it in 2020. We had an idea that we had developed something quite good. But as we talked about, both getting the support of the industry, but also to implement it and implement all the processes around it to have it run rather smoothly and seamlessly has been a success. So we're super happy at where we are today, and we're happy that Fashion Council Germany has followed in our footsteps, and we have this great collaboration with you where we can also learn from you. And just likewise, we also have partnerships with the Norwegian Fashion Hub and Oslo Runway, as well as British Fashion Council that just a few weeks ago announced that they would be implementing the framework as well, commencing with their BFC New Gen program. So all in all, I think we're getting the ball rolling, and that's also one of the things that Frederick and I talked about in our teams that we talked about in the very beginning was, it's absolutely amazing if we can do it in Copenhagen, because of course, that's going to position our fashion week as a
Pioneer.
pioneers, whatever, front runner, or whatever you can say. But if you actually believe in that you actually want to drive impact and make positive change in the industry, then it's about engaging many more fashion weeks and fashion councils to do the same.
Yeah.
I think for us, and especially for me, it's the timing issue. At the beginning, I was like, why do we need a pilot phase? Just implement it.
Yes.
I'm Danish, I mean, taking so much time. I think I was the first, after many conversations, who suddenly said, can we extend that pilot phase just by a season or two? And that's a big learning, that it's not done overnight.
Yeah.
This entire sustainability movement is not done overnight, but to get something rolling, that's what we're trying to do now in Berlin. That's the start. And I'm looking forward to when we go live and we have success stories like you have them in Copenhagen.
Yeah. And for the wider fashion industry, Frederick, what do you think they can learn from the framework?
Well, I think there are a lot of learnings. Before I started in Futurum, I worked at universities for a long time and did research on sustainability in fashion, and especially on change and implementation. And one of the frustrations was that all of that knowledge very rarely actually comes into play in the industry. There are a lot of solutions that a lot of very clever people have found out, but they don't really exist within the industry necessarily. Yeah. And what I've noticed now, this framework is being implemented in different places, so the common language in itself is really important. What is also doing, it's been part in research, in public programs in Denmark. I've had a lot of conversations with researchers. It's in books, and it's returning to academia as well.
Yeah.
And I think the important part of that is to say that if we create something that seems accessible, even though it still holds a very high criteria on the state of sort of sustainability conversations and solutions, we can actually do something. And I would hope that that can be the example for a wider change that really needs to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still an industry that is so far off, and I think these coming together is so important. But we need to address some very burning questions underneath all of it. And I think this is one example of creating a framework that is focused on change, not on getting everything right, and not on the very long, complicated explanations of everything.
Yeah. Do you want to add something, Cecily?
No.
We've been talking about collaboration between different fashion weeks, and how can you say it's possible to collaborate together and to amplify the sustainability requirements? You just talk about the Britain Fashion Council and about other countries also joining the sustainability requirements journey. How do you think it's possible to collaborate and to amplify the message?
I mean, it is definitely a resource question, because I think that, we have many dialogues with many fashion weeks and fashion councils that that come to us and want to adapt it overnight, and it's not done neither overnight nor with few resources. I would say it requires between probably a position within the council or the fashion week to run this work. So it's an investment, and I don't know if it pays off for the specific council or the specific fashion week, but I think it certainly pays off for the industry.
Yeah.
So I think. It's a question of prioritizing the resources that it does cost, and doing it. But I mean, from the conversations that we've had with plenty of organizations to actually going into partnerships with them, there's it is tricky because it's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But I think there's a belief in the purpose and the mission, and also the movement. So maybe it's us that's doing the wrong thing and making it too complicated. No.
No, I don't think so. I think Obviously, it's a big challenge, and sustainability, it's nowadays everywhere, and everybody's trying to do something better for the industry as well. So I think it's
Yeah, and I actually also think it's really important to mention that I mean, we haven't developed this just as a checklist. It's not just a checklist. It is a complex system. I mean, we even have, and not to bore you with it, but we've even put values on different like parameters relating to each question that we ask in this survey, so that it reflects, well, so that it also can be used as a point system, that you can use internally in your organization to track your progress from season to season. And this insane point system consists of, like, you know, us in every case, with every question assessing, I think it was like the size of potential impact multiplied by complexity. How complex is it to implement in your business? So there's also even like mathematics behind, and so we did that work. No one else needs to do it.
Exactly. I think that's the important part also. And as I mentioned, it's based on the available research that's out there. But that doesn't mean that everybody who works with sustainability in the companies has to know all of this.
No.
That's kind of the change part of saying we're trying to take care of that. Saying if you do this, if you can answer this question, then you're going in the right direction. And I think that it's sort of taking the complexity but making the entry point relatively easy. Again, I'm not saying it's because it is a big system, of course, but it doesn't require you to know all of the reasons behind it necessarily, just whether you're doing it or not. In a way.
Since we're in Berlin and since we're in the Berlin Fashion Week, Scott, can you tell me in one sentence what is your vision for the coming years with the implementation of the sustainability requirements here in the German fashion industry?
That it works. That would feel like my basic expectation, and that we don't have brands that don't fulfill them, and that they can't participate actively during Berlin Fashion Week. Because I mean, everyone knows that we are repositioning Berlin Fashion Week currently, and it would be sad if one of the key players aren't able to participate in that new movement.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all also for being here and listening to us about the sustainability requirements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.